Good afternoon, everybody. Today is MCAT review day 4, and as you can see, we're going to be looking at argument analysis. Okay, so remember, when we're talking about argument, we're talking about taking a position and then using evidence and different types of appeals to state our position and then support that position. Okay, so we know already that the most important thing that I'm going to tell you is that you need to write your essay, right? We need to make sure that we're writing a multi-paragraph essay, so we need to make sure we have an introduction, a conclusion, and then we have our body paragraphs, right? We know this, and we know that we can use the prompt to break this down. We also want to make sure that we are using textual evidence, right? Direct quotes from the text. We know that probably, more than likely, our essay is going to be scored by a computer, and then if there's any issues, it'll be kicked out to an actual person to grade. And having these quotations around our quotes just sort of is one more signal that we are, in fact, using direct evidence from the text, direct quotes. Now, in addition to writing our essay, we also want to make sure that we are breaking down the prompt. So the first thing we want to do once we get into the actual test is look for that prompt, because we know that each section is going to have a writing prompt. And by going and looking at the prompt, we can do a couple things. Number one, we can set our purpose for reading. What am I looking for? What is the topics that are explored? And then what are the claims that might be made? Next, since we've already set our purpose, we can create an organizer. We know whether we're going to have one or two texts, and we know what our task is, what type of writing we're going to be doing. Now, today we're looking at argument. So we know that once we look at our text, the argument might tell us exactly what the main claim is, but at the very least, it is going to tell us what our topic is. Right? Our topic might be something having to do with an historical event and approaches that people took. It might have to do with a societal issue. But we know if we can identify the topic, we can also set our purpose and create our organizer. We can also think about what the author is going to do, right? For our argument, what is the author trying to prove? What is the author trying to prove? And then how does he support the claims, right? What are our minor claims that support our main claim? Minor claims / our reasons. And then what does he use for evidence? Right? What is the evidence in the text that we are looking for? So if we go back and we think about, what is an argument? And please remember that we went and looked at argument in Unit 3. Right, so Unit 3 is our argumentative unit. We looked at Malala, we looked at JFK speech, we looked at some Roosevelt speeches. So just know that Unit 3 is where sort of a lot of our resources exist if we want to go back and take a look at them. But we know that an argument is a piece of writing that takes a position to support and uses claims and evidence to show that their position is true. Right? They're not necessarily trying to convince us of anything. What they're doing is they're taking a position and they're laying out all the evidence so that you can make a decision as to whether you believe them or not, but they're not trying to convince you in the same way that persuasion is. We also know that it's going to be a claim or a statement of position. What is the author arguing for or against? And we'll see exactly what this looks like here in just one second. We also have our reasons or our minor claims, and these are just used by the author to justify the claim to the reader, right? This is sort of our supporting claims. So we have our main claim, and these are all the little claims that add up together to support that main claim and show that it's true. We also have our evidence, proof that the reasons are true. And there's a number of different types of evidence. If we think about like data and statistics for logos, if we think about expert testimony, we're talking about credibility here. Or maybe we're even using anecdotes. Anecdotes were a big thing in Pearson, and maybe you guys focused on those as well. What I really want to get out is that all arguments start with a close reading of the text, right? A close reading. So we want to make sure we're doing all of those things that we would normally do when we're looking at a text. Number one, we're going to set our purpose. All right, we're going to break down the problem. We're going to set our purpose. We're going to know what we are reading for. What is the claim? What is the topic of the claim? And then we're going to read with that in mind. Number two, as we read, we're going to annotate the text. Okay, we're going to annotate for a couple different things. We're going to annotate for developing argument. Okay, one of the things that we're going to look at is how the author develops their argument throughout the text. What are their claims and how do they support the main claims? What evidence do they use? We also want to be looking for passages that directly connect to our prompt, right? And we're going to make notes on those so that we don't lose them, because we want to make sure that we can come back for these. And next, we want to make sure that as we are reading our text, as we're doing a close reading, we're also using those critical skills to ask questions. Because if we have questions while we're doing our analysis, this is something we can come back to and say, okay, they did a great job here, but they're a little unclear here, or their evidence doesn't make sense. So we want to make sure that we are doing a close reading of the text as we're reading through and that we've set our purpose, because this is a very important aspect of breaking down an argument. Now, if we're thinking about our argument analysis, we need to make sure that we have identified the main claim, right? What is the main claim that the author is using? And if we're looking at the prompt already, we already know what this is going to connect to. We also want to make sure that the claims that the author is using are identified, right? We want to identify those supporting claims. And we know that as we go through the essay or the speech or whatever nonfiction piece of text they're going to give us, that we are looking at, those topic sentences and sort of the evidence that's being used to support those claims. And then when we think about what type of evidence does the author use to support their minor claims, right? Do they use data? Do they use emotions? Do they use the credibility of the author, right? We'll see what this looks like in just one second. And then what type of rhetoric appeals does the author use? And, in here we talked about the rhetorical triangle, logos, ethos, and pathos. And if, those are not in the right place on the rhetorical triangle, that's okay. They all exist in the triangle some way. And let's talk about ethos, pathos, and logos right now. So with ethos, pathos, and logos, we're talking about three different types of appeal, right? Logos is the appeal to logic or intelligence, right? Can somebody follow your evidence and come to the same conclusion that you came to, right? We want to follow a line of reasoning, right? And really want to think about this with like verifiable evidence, so things like statistics or primary sources, right? If we're using this type of evidence, we can, lead the reader to have a special thought, right? They can have an idea of what we're trying to communicate, and they can arrive at the same conclusion based on how well we lay out those pieces of evidence. We could also use appeal to emotion, and I always think about the SPCA here. We've all seen those commercials with Sarah McLachlan where, they're showing all the sad pictures, and they have that song, "In the Arms of an Angel," right? They have that song playing. That's emotional appeal. They're trying to get you to feel sad for these dogs, feel sympathy, so that you go and adopt them. That is emotional appeal, right? It evokes the listener's feelings, including sympathies for others, right? And we're looking at the connotation, right? The emotional charge of the appeal, okay? And also keep in mind, that's not just like, oh, I feel sad, so I'm going to do this. It could also be like moral. Do you think that this is right? It could be a religious appeal, or even patriotic. This idea that, you can question somebody's patriotism, and by questioning it, maybe you can get them to do something. All Americans do this, and you're like, oh, I don't do that. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about emotions, that we're, thinking about pathos in the sense of, do the pieces of evidence make the reader feel something? And last but not least, we have the appeal to authority or ethos. And I like to think about this as the credibility of the evidence. The speaker's credibility, the things that they're saying. Are they an expert on the topic? So, for example, you would never bring your car to me and be like, oh, Mr. Severson, I need you to look at my car. Number one, I'm going to say no thanks because I don't know anything about cars. But if I try to give a presentation on cars, number one, it wouldn't go very well. But number two, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. I don't believe a word that he says. That's okay. I am not an expert on cars. But somebody like Jeff Gordon or Denny Hamlin, yeah, they're experts. Roosevelt uses this in the pieces of the text that we looked at because he's the president, right? Because he's the president, he has credibility, right? We want to listen to what he says because he is the president, that he has specific knowledge that is important, and he uses this to strengthen his argument. So that's what we're talking about with credibility, and we might see something along the lines of, John, professor of ethics at Syracuse University, right? In this right here, this is an example of trying to establish the credibility of the author. So if we're looking at analyzing an argument, and we're going to say, okay, they use the credibility of the author, they appeal to the authority. This would be a piece of evidence that you might be able to use, right? It's in a positive phrase that gives more information about John. Who's John? John is a professor of ethos at Syracuse University. He's definitely an authority on moral questions, okay? So those are our types of appeal that we're going to look at, or at least that we have looked at already throughout our first semester. Now, I really want to look at conspiracy theories, and I know this sounds unusual, but I really feel like conspiracy theories are a great way to learn about creating an argument, okay? So, for example, the faking of the moon landing, okay? So there are a lot of people who believe that the moon landing was fake, right? And this is our main claim. Right, this is the main claim that the person would make, that the moon landing was faked. Okay? And I can say, okay, so this is our main claim that the moon landing was faked. Then I also have to have minor claims. If we look at some of the minor claims that these people believe about the moon landing, one of them is that if you look at the American flag and still pictures from the Apollo 11 mission, it appears to be flapping in the wind, but how can that be since there's no wind on the moon? Now, ignoring the problem with this idea that the only possibility for the flag to be moving or to appear moving is that there has to be wind, this is the minor claim. Okay, this is the minor claim. It's meant to support and be a supporting, reason as to why the moon landing was faked. Now, we can go and look at this, and we need to think about, okay, number one, is this a credible piece of evidence? And the answer is no, right? Because we can go and look and say, okay, so NASA designed special flags for astronauts to take with them that had a stick, a horizontal rod that makes the flag stick out. And we can actually see, if you guys look closely, right here, we see this rod that allows the flag to stay sticking out horizontally. So even though, we can debunk this, right? We can say, okay, like this evidence doesn't make sense. This is why NASA thought of this, and this is what they did. So this would be our counterclaim. Sorry, that doesn't make sense. As a matter of fact, this is our minor claim. So our counterclaim counters this evidence. But if we think about the construction of this argument, we have our main claim that the moon landing was faked, and we have our minor claim that, the flag was waving on the moon, so it had to be faked. Now, this is just the way that an argument can be constructed. It's one of the reasons I like to look at, conspiracy theories. So if we look at one like, the earth is flat or Bigfoot exists, Bigfoot, we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, right? My uncle has a friend in Missouri whose nephew's brother's sister went to school with a guy who one time was in a restaurant talking to somebody who had a friend that saw Bigfoot in the woods, right? That's anecdotal evidence. I was out camping and there was a big shadow on my tent. It was Bigfoot. Area 51, aliens. All of these things have, the major claim that these things are a conspiracy. The earth is flat, Bigfoot exists, there's aliens at Area 51. And then we have the minor claims, right? Minor claims. Now, if we're looking at, why these are conspiracy theories, because a lot of times we have counterclaims, just like we had with the moon landing, right? It's the idea that we can say, okay, this is what you guys believe, but here's the actual fact. Here's the evidence that shows that that is wrong. And that would be an example of a counterclaim. So let's move on. And if we're looking at the actual structure of the exam, just like we would with our literary analysis, just like we would with any EBSR questions, we want to use them for the writing of our task, right? And you're going to have questions that say, like, how does the author develop the claim blank in paragraph blank, right? It might say in paragraph 2, how does the author support their claim? And you would have to identify evidence, right? You might have to identify the minor claim. You might also have questions about the claims of the author, the evidence the author uses, how the argument develops, and how the specific passage developed the claims of the author. You might have, like a drag and drop, like paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4. And it might say, okay, here are your pieces of evidence. Pick which one goes with which paragraph. You might have something like that. And then most importantly, guys, I cannot stress this enough. Use the EBSR questions to support the writing of your argument analysis, because your argument analysis is really going to be dependent upon how well you can analyze arguments. And using your answers for the EBSR questions is the best way to do that, right? Because it's going to talk about the claims, it's going to talk about evidence, it's going to talk about the development of the claims of the author. And using these things really give you guys a head start on writing your analysis. So, if we think about breaking down a prompt for argument, okay, this one comes directly from PARC, which is a close mirror for what we can expect for MCAT. It says, write an essay that compares and contrasts a primary argument in each text that you have read regarding the decision to drop the atomic bomb. Your essay should explain how effectively you think each author supported that claim with reasoning or evidence. Be sure to use evidence from the 3 texts to support your ideas. Okay, so we already know based on this that there are going to be 3 texts, and that the topic is going to be the decision to drop the atomic bomb, right? And we also know that it's going to compare and contrast, and we can think about how effectively the author supported the claim with reasoning and or evidence. If we think of reasoning and evidence, we can go back to our rhetorical triangle of ethos, pathos, and logos. Right? We can go back to say, okay, this author used ethos, this author used pathos, this author used logos, who was more effective? So then when we are thinking about setting up our organizer, we might have things like, text 1, text 2, text 3. Then we might even have something like, logos, pathos, ethos, and say, okay, yeah, they use logos. Okay, text 2 uses pathos and ethos, but doesn't use logos. And text 3 uses all 3, right? So then when we talk about, which one is more effective in supporting their claims with reasoning or evidence, we have our organizer, we have our paragraph numbers, so really breaking down the prompt and setting ourselves up for success really depends on, the work we do up front. And we want to make sure that we do that work up front by breaking down the prompt, setting our purpose, identifying the topic, and creating an organizer so that we can keep track as we close read those texts. I'm going to save this one actually until tomorrow, so we're not going to go over it. These are just some common phrases that you'll probably see on MCAT, things like perspective, how someone understands and views an issue based on his or her current relationship to it, and analysis of the issue. What I think about here is maybe like COVID relief. If you're at home and you're struggling, you may really be arguing for COVID relief because your perspective is different than somebody who maybe makes a little bit more money and doesn't have to have that money. Maybe your perspective is different than theirs, and so your argument is going to be a little bit different based on your perspective. We know about thesis and claims. We know about evidence and reasoning. So, take a second. Just you don't have to make flashcards and memorize these, but these are great terms to sort of take a look at. This is an organizer that you guys could set up, right? If you want to tracing, you can use this for tracing the development of the argument, right? What is the issue? What is the perspective? Then what is the position, right? And we think about, issue, we're thinking about the topic, we're talking about position, what is the claim? And then these are all the supporting claims. Okay, so this is just a good way to sort of trace through or use this as an organizer prior to jumping into the actual text, setting this up so you have, something to go back to and add to as you move forward. This is just another one, right? A close reading, what are the details? Why are the details important? How are they connected, right? And this is a big thing, connecting. And you're clear about the text, this is more about writing your own argument, but it's great to think about in the sense of, okay, these are the things, these are the details that the author uses, are the details connected? Does he do a good job or does she do a good job of making a connection between each of these elements in the text? All right. So guys, this is, breaking down an argument. If you have any questions, please let me know. And I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say about this. And I will see you guys again tomorrow.